So 10 mistakes you'd want to avoid in a non-technical Microsoft interview. The first one is also a pretty standard one, but not using the STAR method to answer these tell me about the time when types of questions, the behavioral types of questions. The challenge here is that you must understand these interviewers are wired in this way. They prefer to listen to the STAR answer, even if you maybe find an even better way to answer these questions. But because they prefer to receive this information in a standardized format and take notes and eventually share these notes in a standardized format with other interviewers, the STAR method is a must-have for these interviews. The second mistake you'd want to avoid in a interview at Microsoft is not spotting and not knowing exactly what's a behavioral question or when a behavioral question gets asked. So the definition of behavioral interviewing is that they look at your past experience to predict your future performance on the job. And these questions can be framed, not only tell me about the time when you failed, so that's obvious, but also tell me about one of your projects. There's many variations of these behavioral interviews in the sense that you could even use the STAR method to answer tell me about yourself if you really wanted to. It's not mandatory, but you should, in my opinion, spot the opportunity wherever possible to interview behaviorally within these occasions, because this is the best way to structure your communication. Of course, here probably director level roles will not necessarily agree with me that templates will always sound best, but for the most part, I would say for more than 90% of job interviews, structuring your communication is actually good advice. Number 3 here, a mistake. Especially in the case of Microsoft interviews where behavioral interviewing is not the main thing, let's admit it, is that some people unfortunately do not prepare for them at all. And when you don't prepare for them at all, it means you are likely not to have an answer or not to have a story for the question that you're getting asked. Simple example, do you have a failure that you can feel comfortable talking about right now? Is it quantifiable? Is it the true one? Is it the recent one? Is it the significant one? I know from experience people tend to struggle with these things, especially if they're just getting started. So long story short, do prepare for the behavioral part of the interview, even if you only prepare a couple of 5 or 10 stories depending on seniority of the role. But yes, preparation is something that will make a difference in a behavioral interview, and the difference in behavioral interviews is ideally made between the quality of your answers, not on whether you have or you don't have an answer. So that's where you want to be. That's where you want to make a difference in the quality of your answers, which of course you must have the stories first for. Number 4, it's a little bit linked with number 3 here, in the sense that some of you will not have a story for the question you're getting asked, and then you lie, you'll make something up. Now from experience, and I'm doing this for quite some time, it's not as straightforward to lie in a behavioral interview as you might think. And to give a little bit of background here, as far as I know, these behavioral interviews were primarily used in investment banking. So people who are supposed to be great speakers. So if it's been used successfully there, and now it's being extended to, let's say, even software development engineers, if you want, to a certain extent, not lying in these behavioral interviews is not necessarily a very efficient technique. So I would very much have you to consider this, even if you role play with someone, to see, hey, am I lying the right way? If you want, there are people who can lie, it should be said, but that's primarily for senior sales role and people who are really, really good at communicating, and people who understand how to lie about these things, not to lie with the whole story, but maybe selling yourself a bit more on your strengths here and there every now and then. Yes, that's normal. Number 5, overthinking a behavioral interview. Of course, I'm not expecting many of you to be overthinking these things, but there are people who actually run into these problems too. What do I mean by overthinking? First example, you prepare too many cheat sheets. Very few candidates know how to manage cheat sheets effectively, and I've coach quite a few hundred people, so I know about these things. So if you prepare cheat sheets, understand that they expect you to prepare cheat sheets, and it's actually they might as well appreciate that you prepare for the behavioral part of the interview, because not many people do prepare for these things. So if you do prepare something concise to the point. Another common way to overthink these behavioral interviews is to prepare answers for all possible questions. Now, I do not recommend this, because what I noticed here is that if you start with such an approach, especially if you start with such an approach, your preparation will be more geared versus quantity rather than quality. So I'd rather have 10 high quality stories on which I'll brainstorm 2 or 3 days than having, all possible answers, questions, just, to test the water to see if I can have an answer for them. Remember what I earlier said, the difference is made in the quality of the answers, not on whether you have an answer or not. And last but not least on overthinking these things, overdressing. So don't overdress for a interview with Microsoft. They even say on their jobs website that wear whatever makes you feel comfortable, especially for the virtual on-sites. Number 5, memorizing answers. Memorizing answers is something that simply, again, does not really fly. More likely that beginners will feel tempted to do this, but understand 2 things here. First of all, they might sound scripted and you can test it by role-playing with someone. Or the second one is that if you have the 20 most commonly asked behavioral questions and you memorize an answer for each, what happens if you get a question you haven't prepared for during that interview? Well, I tell you what, chances are you'll block. So this is what happens. This is another side effect of memorizing things. So memorizing things is not flying usually with these things. Number 7, complicated answers. So this is a Microsoft specific one, and especially because they, one of the leadership principles, one of the things that they really scan everyone in these interviews is whether you generate clarity. So whenever you're giving an answer, make sure it's clear. Make sure you're making yourself understood. I'm not saying, you should be concise. I'm not saying you should be 10 minutes long, but make sure you're sending clarity as a message here. Number 8, with respect to these virtual on-sites, what's more important? An important thing that you might not be aware of is that the quality of your sound, because even if the video crashes every now and then, that's normal, the connection is not that strong, but if the sound crashes, then you have no interview. You could even consider using dial-in numbers as opposed to your digital connection if you want, but the sound is really, really important in this virtual, is the main thing if you want. Number 9, rapport building. So rapport building, what I mean by this, I mean those first awkward 2 or 3 minutes in the conversation where you get to know each other, someone you haven't met before, and as well as, at the end of the conversation, when you're after the conversation ends, when you're supposed to send a thank you note. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance of these things, especially for more junior roles. Don't just answer with hi. You could introduce yourself, you could use you can refer to other videos I have on this channel if you want more advice, but rapport building is something you would want to take seriously because it's often, the starting point of a conversation. And if you send a thank you note, wherever you feel appropriate, that might also, you could also include with that thank you note more clarifications of how the interview went, or more details if you want. This is also something acceptable in many cases. Number 10, mistake you want to avoid in an interview at Microsoft is to forget to prepare questions for them. And it's as simple as that. You must spend some time to invest to find a couple of questions you would want to ask them. Here are some examples if you want, but keep in mind that also the best questions will be a combination of these lists of what do you think could be interesting to ask, as well as how the conversation evolves during that interview. So this would be my 10 mistakes to avoid in Microsoft interviews. Hopefully you found this useful.